will finish in a moment, I promise you. Good evening, everyone. Isn't that nice? Welcome to Brooklands. I'm Steve Clarke, as if you didn't know that. Thank you very much indeed. No heckling, please. I'll start again. Thank you for being here, and once again, thank you for supporting the Trust. A very warm welcome to our worldwide YouTube viewers, whether it be good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or wherever you are. But a special welcome to Amanda McLaren and Steve Donnell down there in New Zealand. I hope you're able to join in and listen to this evening. So our guest this evening needs no introduction, but I will. Neil Trundle. Understand. You're over there. Welcome, Neil. Oh, God, don't start. You only had one drink as well, so you're doing well. Before I start the formal proceedings, just a few parish notices. Now, Neil and I are loosely termed gentlemen of a certain age. Whilst we perfected the art of drinking, we're not very good at hanging on to it these days. So we are going to have a comfort break in about 45 minutes, which will give you time to go to the bar. If Colin Mullen is here, that'll please him, because he's been bending my ear for the last 7 years to get a bar extension during the talk. So we're going to break for that, and then we'll have some Q&A with Neil, because I know that there's a lot of you that have got questions you'd love to ask him. Some will be embarrassing, and others will be just factual, but by all means, ask those questions. There are a number of Neil's former colleagues here tonight, more than I tend to want to mention, from his days at Brabham, Tyrrell, Rondel, Project 2 and McLaren, and I'm sure we will hear from them later. But I have one sad announcement to make. I'm sure many of you will know that our good friend Jeff Dovey, who looked after the Napier Route for many years, drove it spiritedly at various events. And Chris Moore said to me, his name will be ever more linked with that car. He died at the weekend, a great loss to everyone, but a lovely man. Our sympathies go to his son, Andrew, and to the entire family. Thank you. Now, throughout my 7 years of running the Talks programme, you'll have to indulge me for just a moment, and you'll have to wait. Which is unusual for Neil to wait. You deserve it. I've always maintained that I've stood on the shoulders of giants when we've delivered these series of talks. And those four giants, Steve Parish, Simon Taylor, Richard Williams and Steve Cropley. Unfortunately, Steve Parish is off earning money somewhere else tonight. Love to be with us, but he will be watching. He was the first guest that I booked, and it was a sellout from day one. He's been a great entertainer. He's brought some of the very best motorcycle riders worldwide to us. It's been a bit edgy at times, and I'm sure that many of you remember certain eventuals have been here, Carl Fogarty being one. But we'll move on from there. Likewise, Simon Taylor, in my mind, a legend. I remember listening to him doing Grand Prix commentary years ago, and who would have believed that he could be here with us? He's brought us some absolutely superb motorsport legends over the years. And a personal thanks to him for the Stirling Moss event he commented on so well. And the final couple of people, Richard Williams, motorsport, music and sports journalist. Books include Death of Senna and the Richard Seaman book, Race with Life and Death. Richard, thank you. It's been a pleasure knowing you. This is going to sound morbid, but Richard writes the most wonderful obituaries.
I remember that.
Yeah. You learn more about certain... We have a common taste in music, and some of the stuff that he writes actually brings these people back to life again. So thank you, Richard. And finally, Steve Cropley. Welcome, mate. Good to see you. Steve has more knowledge and contacts in the motor industry than anyone else I know. If he's offered me buckets full of advice, and thank you. My only regret is that you're not on the trustee board here, Steve. But we won't go there. But gentlemen, thank you. So, here we are again, another instalment of the ramblings of a racing man. And we must be careful that we don't ramble too much tonight.
Okay, we have a certain amount of time.
We will.
And we've got to pack a bit in.
But here to talk about you tonight, not McLaren, not the design, not the gearboxes, okay, but your history of how you got to be where you were and where you are today.
Okay. Can I first say, great to be here. And we cancelled this last year.
Yeah, we did.
And here we are, hopefully coming out of COVID and Omicron, and it's wonderful
Absolutely.
to support Brooklands.
100%. Now, you're a self-confessed Essex boy, aren't you?
Oh, I certainly am. I used to talk like that.
But you could do with a bit of persuasion, couldn't you? But you started an apprenticeship with Ford's.
Yep.
Which you got your first taste of motorsport. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I did a 5-year apprenticeship in the trade school, which, like Rolls-Royce apprenticeship, was one of the best in England, and I did okay. I did 3 years at the trade school, and it was all male, unfortunately. We didn't have girls coming in then. And then I moved out into the foundry and the forge plant. But I started to... my interest in racing started on two wheels and motorbikes. And my wife and I, who's here tonight, supporting me, we used to go to Brands Hatch, and I remember seeing Mike Hayward, and bikes were my love. But then I started following cars, and whilst I was at Ford's, East Anglian Racing were operating a semi-works Anglia team, Ford Anglia team, club racing. And Roger Taylor was the son of one of the directors, and so lots of parts came through the prototype tool room that I was working in. I was in Dunton Research from day one, first in the door we were, and I was a turner, toolmaker, fitter, and lots of bits used to come through for those race cars. So I followed the racing, and I thought...
This is your future.
Yep, and I wanted to be a race driver. That was, in fact, lots of the mechanics that I've known over the years have always fancied themselves as race drivers. In fact, some of them made it as race drivers.
Sure. So your next move, and I'm fascinated to how you finished up in the leafy lanes of Surrey with the Alain Racing organisation.
Yeah, so I was building, I built a monoposto car, single-seater, to go racing with. And in fact, I had a Lotus 11 on the road before that, and I swapped it with a guy named Reg Gubbins. It's a nice name. Reg Gubbins, Essex boy in Rainham. I swapped it for this Lotus 18 Formula Junior, and I raced it a couple of times. But during that time, a friend of mine, Ray Tunney, who's listening in tonight, Ray Tunney, who was also an apprentice, and he went into the drawing office side. His passion was racing as well. We would go rallying and do all-night rallies. We'd work all day, rally all night, and work all the next day. No sleep. He left Ford's and got a job at Cooper Cars.
Of course.
And with John Rhodes on the Minis. And a few months after that, he rang me up and he said, Alan Mann are recruiting. Why don't you come for an interview? Mm. So I came down to Surrey, and I got the job straight away. And I told Dad I'm leaving home. I was 23, so I wasn't young, but so I didn't have anywhere to live. I arrived at Alain Mann, and they were building the beautiful F3L, which was a fantastic
beautiful car.
Sports car. Mm-hmm. I came in with my little small toolboxes, and these guys had great big listers, you know. With
size matters.
Yes. And I worked all day, and we did an all-nighter, my first day there.
Remind everyone, or some that don't know, just a very quick snapshot of Alain Mann Racing organisation and who was driving at the time.
So they were in Oyster Lane. Clive Wharton, who's here tonight, he was working there. Frank Gardner was the driver.
Big Frank Gardner.
Yeah. who used to walk tippy-toe and was a great character. He drove the Escorts, he drove the F3L, they built the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang there, they built the Doppelganger. So I went to the door as a fitter mechanic.
They were always such well-turned-out cars as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, lovely colour scheme.
Yeah. Ahead of its time, really.
Yeah, and supported by Fords.
So the next port of call was a cold call to Brabham's.
Right.
Waylock Works.
Yeah.
And you encountered one Ron Toranak.
Yes. I'd only been at Alain Mann 6 months and they started to lay people off. As it turned out, Alain was winding it down and he took Ford's money and started Alain Mann Helicopters. So he folded the company. So I walked down the road, walked into Ron Toranak's office. What? Asked the secretary, walked in and met Ron, sit down. Yeah, what can I do for you? I'd like a job.
Do you want to do a Ron Toranak accent?
Yep. And I said, I'd like to be a race mechanic. And he said, only good race mechanics are Australians and New Zealanders. He said, but you can go in the production shop. So I started building production race cars. But every night I would slip into the F1 shop where Ron Dennis was a mechanic and I would work till midnight on the cars for no extra money. That was our passion.
And that was your first encounter with Ron?
That was my first encounter. We didn't hit it off straight away.
Why doesn't that surprise me?
Okay. So I'd only been there a few months doing building production cars, and Jerry Holmes, God rest him, lovely foreman, he said, have you got your passport with you? He said, you're off to Zandvoort with Jack. They got a problem with the Repco engine.
Perfect example of one of the shops down there.
Yeah, look at that. That was our production shop.
Amazing place.
Yeah, we built beautiful race cars, and they would make 60 cars in a year.
And who were the predominant F1 drivers at the time?
Well, 1968, I mean, Jackie X, Rint was coming up. In fact, Rint was on board then. He came from Cooper's with Ron. Ron started at Cooper's, and when Rint came to Brabham's, Ron Dennis came with him. Stewart, X, all those guys, heroes.
We've often talked about campaigning to get a blue plaque put down, haven't we?
Yeah,
when you think about what was generated from that
Waylock
tiny
Works.
factory,
yep,
and the designers that have come through that place is just absolutely...
Gordon Murray was there from South Africa in 1970. So, Ralph Bellamy, and Toranak was a tough cookie and generally had to make something before he could draw it because he couldn't envisage it quite. So you'd make about 3 prototypes and then he'd draw it. Tony Whitman's here tonight. He was on the team. Yeah. In fact, there's so many people, mechanics that I work with here, that they should be up here talking about their careers.
Well, they may want to take to the floor later. We shall wait and see. But the obviously the first meeting with Ron Dennis really mapped things for the future. Well,
it did. We went to Zandvoort because there was a problem with the engine. I flew out on Jack's plane. I'd never flown before. I was feeling pretty ill for the first hour of the flight, but I fell asleep and woke up in Zandvoort. And interestingly, we used to drive the cars from the garage in the town out to the circuit. But my first real encounter with Ron was that we'd worked all night and I was asked to put the clutch back on. I never worked on these race cars, but, a clutch is a clutch. And I put the clutch, aligned it all in. And I had cleaned it all out like Ron is used to. And he said, we don't do things like that at Brabham's. And I said, how'd you like a smack on the nose?
and you've never looked back since, have you?
From then on, we were best mates. We'd socialise and,
Great story.
Times at Brabham's. Yeah.
So let's move to 1971 and the birth of Rondel Racing.
Okay, so Ron and I were on the F1 team, and I also did Indianapolis, 69 and 70. And so end of 1970, Jack decided to retire. In fact, arguably, he should have won the championship, but for 2 failures. One was Monaco, where on the last corner he ran in the barriers, with Rint hard on his tail, and Brands when he ran out of fuel, which Ron got the blame for, but it turns out it wasn't Ron. I went to Jack's 80th birthday party in Australia. Pam and I went, and Nick Guzey sent a letter, and he said, by the way, Jack, it wasn't Ron. He said, I set the metering unit in the wrong position. It used too much fuel. All those years, and Ron took the brunt of that.
But at least he accepted it, so that was
He did
probably
accept
good.
it, yeah.
Perfect.
So at the end of 70, Jack retired, and I went back to Essex to finish my Formula Ford that myself and a colleague, John Field, were building. And Ron had thought, I can do this as well as Brabham's. So he rang me up, came to see me, and he said, I think we can start a race team together.
But Ron was all about image then, wasn't he?
He was, but he was very, he could see in the future, you know, he was very ambitious. But everything had to be right, yes. So we set up Rondel. We had no money at all. We lived with Ron's parents, rent-free, no food, didn't pay them a penny for a year. We did have a sponsor, Tony Vlasopoulos, who sadly passed away last year, a Greek shipping guy. He didn't put a fortune in, but he backed us. We got engines from Bernie Ecclestone. In fact, we picked up the engines, 2 engines, because Graham Hill also said, Schenken and I, let's do 2-car team. And but we didn't pay Bernie for them, and we got a phone call, a bit of a threatening phone call, so we quickly paid Bernie.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. So we set up Rondel, and it was immaculate.
But Brabham's were very helpful, and Ron Tornat was very helpful too, wasn't he?
Tornat was the fairest man you'd ever meet in business, and so we didn't have to pay for the cars till the end of the year. In fact, later when we talk about my F3 team, he also gave me fantastic credit, and so he supported all the teams. I mean, we talk about Dick and I in F3. He was very supportive.
Yeah, probably not a well-understood man then in that case.
No, dead straight, and the best payer to all his traders as well, apparently. Yeah, good guy.
So in 73, you started to look at the prospect of a Rondel F1 car.
Yep, which is that car there.
Perfect timing.
Yes. So Ron was ambitious, over-ambitious. I mean, he was a shaker and mover, but he was a bit over-ambitious. We kind of overstepped ourselves in 73. We went from 2 cars to 3 cars to eventually 5 cars. And we were running a sports car, we were building our own chassis, and we started to build what was going to be the Rondel F1 car.
Yeah.
But that was the fuel crisis then, 3-day week, and we lost our sponsors. We lost Motul, Domex Sherry were going to come on board, and Tony Vlasopoulos said, I can't float the business any longer. Our workshop, we had a new workshop in Feltham, which was spotless. It had a tile floor, partitioning. It was F1 standard.
Or beyond.
Or beyond, yeah. And so we folded, and Graham Hill took it over for his F1 team.
So did it not morph into the token F1 design?
Yeah, when we folded, Ron went down the road somewhere, which I didn't know initially where. I was trying to salvage the creditors. I have to say, we owed people money, but they got paid back when Ron set up his own team and McLaren. All those people got the money back 10 times over. So Tony Vlasopoulos took the F1 car, what became the token. So the token was Tony Vlasopoulos and Ken Grob became the token. We went into a little workshop in Hersham.
Halfway.
Yeah. 2 of us, Chris Lewis and myself, and Ray Jessup, the designer. We had lots of helpers, including my father now and again. Pam came down and fed us night and day. We didn't leave the workshop for 3 weeks, and we entered the Silverstone Daily Express Trophy with the car with Tom Price. Chris Meek sponsored Tom. He bought the engine. That was our F1 car, the token. It's a lovely little car. Still running now in historics.
Wonderful. At some point, you realised you wanted to move on to development, and you went to Tyrrell.
Yep. So I was worn out. I was absolutely...
I think you'd gone on record and saying you've just about burnt out.
I was. So I rang Ken and I went down there and I said I'd like to do prototype work and started at Tyrrell. A fantastic team. Happy years. So I went there in 74 and I did 74, 75 and 76. And they were great days. I was involved in building the six-wheel Tyrrell. In fact, I was the sort of project manager. We took a 007 and we cut the front off, and Derek Garner designed all the steering. And it wasn't any quicker than the 007, but it certainly made the press.
Certainly did.
And we did the launch at London and covered the front wheels, and when we pulled the cover off. Best kept secret in motor racing.
But the rumour is true, you were the first person to drive it?
I was, yeah. So once we launched it, we needed to do all the brake balancing and check the brakes out, and our drivers were elsewhere racing. So Ken said, "You've got a racing licence." He said, "You can test it." So my mechanics that I worked with had to be my race mechanics on the day.
I bet they loved that.
Great. And I was determined not to spin it, but I came down on about the 10th time and did a spin turn, and I lost it, and they all cheered.
Was it completely different to drive?
No. Well, I mean, I'd driven Formula 4. It was no, you wouldn't have known. I mean, you could see the wheels, and we had little windows in the side.
So you could see? Yeah,
but Jody hated that car, and it was actually very unsafe, but it was quick, and he had a couple of wins. Oh, no, he had one win with it and loads of second places. And that was, for me, magic time. Pam and I were together then, and I used to say to her, "I'm doing this secret car, and what's different about it?" I said, "It's got 4 wheels at the front." And she used to forget, and I was afraid she'd tell someone. It was the best kept secret in motor racing.
Yeah. Marvellous times. So, back to Ron Dennis.
Yep.
Project 1, Project 2, the BMW era.
So,
Pro car.
I went back with Ron end of 76. Why did I leave Tyrrell? I loved Formula 2, and Ron encouraged me to come back. He could be very persuasive, you know.
I'm sure.
So he said, and I was moonlighting for him anyway, doing stuff, and welding and stuff in the evenings. So he said, "Come back and join me. We're moving places, you know." So I went end of 76, and we went right through till the amalgamation with McLaren. So, and we did so much. We won the championship. Dick was running the car for Stefan with Marlboro money. And this was the big Marlboro involvement, starting to come in with Ron. I should just go back, because when we had Rondel, John Hogan, God bless him, Mr. Marlboro, he was working for us at Rondel 1973 on 10% of any money he could find. And he didn't find us much, but he found himself a damn good job in Marlborough. So Ron called on the favour, and Ron started to get Marlborough money. So we ran Nicky Lauda in the pro cars. Peter Hennessy is here. We built 36 of those things.
And where did you build those?
We built them in Poole Road, in what was the old furniture warehouse.
Yeah.
And we built them in the upper floor, and Peter and I put in what was a truck lift, a 4-screw lift to bring them up to the second floor. And we built 36 of those, and there was the Pro Car Championship.
Yeah.
We ran Formula 2 for Chico Serra with Marlboro. He had Brazil money for Andrea de Cesaris with Marlboro money. So we were getting well in with Marlboro. And then we started to build what was going to be the Project 4 Formula 1 car.
You talked about the amalgamation with Project 4 and McLaren. How did that go, and what was your involvement?
Okay, so my involvement was in the carbon chassis. So I'd like to put it on record that I was the person that introduced John Barnard to British Aerospace when we sat around the table, and British Aerospace said, you're not looking at honeycomb, you should be looking at composite carbon. I met this guy in hospital when I was having my tonsils out, and I said to him, we need some advice on doing honeycomb chassis. So we went down to British Aerospace, and they were the ones that put us on the carbon chassis. So we started to build the carbon chassis. And the assistant on that project to John Barnard was Arthur Webb.
Yeah.
And Arthur was here at the John Watson talk.
Evening. Yeah.
And at the end of John's talk, we had questions, and I mentioned Arthur, and I said, Arthur, are you here tonight? There's a rumour you're here. And he never stood up.
No.
And afterwards, he came up to me and he said, what was your involvement in the carbon chassis? And I said, I made the mould. I said, you're Arthur Webb. And he said, yep. And he didn't earn a penny for that. He did it voluntarily. So he helped John to design that car. That brokered the amalgamation. McLarens were on the slippery slope. They couldn't design a stiff enough chassis for ground effect. So the M28, M29, M30, which H was probably working on, they weren't stiff enough. They were ground effect, but you needed a good stiff chassis. And so John Hogan and Marlborough said, you either amalgamate with Ron or we pull the plug. That was it. We amalgamated October 1980. That was my involvement.
And you were still based in Colnbrook at the time?
So we were in Poole Road,
yeah,
building the F1, what was going to be the MP4 F1 car, which later became MP41. We were in Poole Road, they were in Colnbrook. So we were backwards and forwards. And eventually Ron gave up the Poole Road and went to Colnbrook. But the true gelling of the team was when Ron forced them to move to Woking, to Boundary Road. And that really brought the whole thing together. Yeah.
Interesting times, I can imagine.
It was just fantastic, yeah. You know, so in 81, when I was involved, first off with McLaren's, I was involved in doing the new wind tunnel at Teddington. There was a spare wind tunnel, and we needed our own wind tunnel. I was involved in that, but there was a lot of backstabbing. The gel wasn't, you know, we weren't working together. There was them and us, Project 4 and McLaren guys. And I had the chance to set up my own F3 team. So I missed those magic times of that car with the DFE engine, and then, of course, with the tag turbo engine. I really missed those times. But I had my own little F3 team.
So it was a big move for you, really, when you started your own F3 team.
I can't believe the risk I took. And Pam never picked me up on it, never said, are you sure you should be doing this? We had good money. We had Klaus Schinkel, a Mexican, and we had the going rate, which at the time was $4,500 per race, which included 2 tests. We had the contract for the year. Ron helped me. I bought lots of kit off Ron from the old Project 4 days. He helped me. He didn't want me to leave, but he helped me. And so we were off and running with our own team. We had a little caravan, and Pam was making meat pies for the races.
Based in Woking again?
Yeah. Yeah, in Ron's old workshop. Not the big workshop, he had a little one round the corner.
Yeah. Heady days.
Heady days. Do you want to talk about F3? We've got time?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Well, Dick and I ran neck and neck for the F3 season in 81. He had 4 race start on me. He was running Palmer, and he had 4 races on me, and I was trying to catch him up all year. I had Tassin. Tassin came to me after a few races. My Mexican driver wasn't very good. And Tassin was in the Argo, and that was rubbish. And he, Nick Jordan, allowed him to leave and come with me. So I built the second car. I built that in a rush. With Rolts, you had to go and build your own car if you weren't in a hurry. I ground my finger off trying to get it on a quick ziz on the grinder before a test, a good one. I lost my whole thumbnail, but we still made good wood tests. And I chased him all year. We had 5 wins, and he had 7, I think, and we never called him up, so we were neck and neck. It was good, though.
And you're still talking to him?
Yeah, well, yeah, he's Mr. F3, isn't it? Well, he was Mr. F3,
yeah, absolutely.
So magic time, my F3 team.
So, 1988, you're enticed back to McLaren?
Before that, 85.
85.
So I ran my little F3 team, but we were struggling to get money. I was let down by a Brazilian driver, Louis Schaffer. He said he did 4 races, and I came for the next payment, and he said, I don't have any more money. I never had it in the first place. So I didn't zap him one, but I found other drivers, and so I folded the F3 team.
Yep.
I bought a little garage in Woking, Fuller's Garage, and I was doing a bit of moonlighting for Ron at McLaren, and he said, what the hell are you doing? So I was clerk of the work for the Shearwater factory called the Orange Bowl with Alain Fenn, great guy. Alain was the sales guy back in the Brabham and Ron days. We fitted the whole place out, the new workshop, and I went back on the team in '87.
Wow.
I was travelling fabricator, and then the end of '87, Ron decided I should be team manager. Team manager.
Sure.
And so we negotiated our money. Unfortunately, my poor old mate Barry Alterhan, he had to stand down, but we went down the pub and sorted it out, and he didn't bear me any grudge. So I was, not team manager, chief mechanic. So that was it, 88 season.
So you were there at the birth of the golden child, the MP4 one.
Yeah.
Tell us about that era.
Okay, so Ron said we got Senna coming on board, and I said, so I want that money plus prize money, and he said, well, we might have a bad year, and I said, we might have a good year. But so Senna brought the Honda engine.
Yeah.
That was the thing, and sadly, we stole the engine from Williams.
And he'd come from Lotus, hadn't he, to you?
He'd come from Lotus. They had Honda with PK and a Japanese driver, and we had Senna with the Williams engine. So we took it straight off Williams, which that happens in racing. Dog eat dog. The Piranha Club.
So that was a crazy season, wasn't it?
Fantastic season.
Talk us through the season that it kind of ended up with Senna winning the championship. But
right.
Well.
Yeah. So, the car was quick, straight out the box. The engine, obviously, was so well sorted. The chassis was good. The drivers were the best. You know, to win a championship, it's quite easy. You've got to get the best engine, best drivers, best tyres, best chassis, and reliability. And if you got all those...
Can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong, and we didn't go wrong. We won 15 out of 16 races, and it was... You know, we didn't have to alter the car drastically. You know, we didn't do massive development like they do now. It was quick out the box, and we kept that advantage all year. And ironically, the Lotus with the same engine, and they had active ride, I think, at the time, it wasn't on the pace. It was just a magic time, and it goes down in history, you know.
For lots of different reasons.
Yeah, and there's some of the designers here tonight,
yeah,
and the team of that car.
So, how did you find working with Senna? What was the relationship like? Well,
he was tough, but he was very quick. But, you know, they were both very clever. They used to use things to their advantage. And so when we went to Imola, the very first test, and Alain was due to run round in the car, and all the other teams had set the pace, we were on the last 2 days of testing. Ferrari had been there, and everyone set the pace. Alain went out and did a few laps, came in, and he said, we can win the championship in this car. And then he went out and put a lap time in, and it was about second half quicker than anyone had run, and they all thought we had the turbo boost up. And Senna wasn't due to drive, and he persuaded Ron. He said, I want to drive it now, you know. He insisted that he had to go, and he went out and obviously went quicker than... Yeah. So he was very pushy, but they were both... They used the team to the best advantage.
And what was the atmosphere like in the team?
It was good in '88. In '89, it all went wrong. Yeah, at Imola, it all went wrong. You know, Alain said Ayrton reneged on the deal as to who should get to the first corner first. The other one wouldn't attempt to pass, and the race was stopped and restarted. And Alain jumped him on the start and down the first corner, and Ayrton promptly went down the inside, and that was it.
Yeah,
that was
I can still hear Murray Walker commenting now.
End of the honeymoon. Yeah. I mean, So we weren't that involved. We were aware of it, but we weren't in the debriefs. I'm sure Steve Nichols was involved a lot, and Joe Ramirez and Neil, they were involved in the bad taste. But in the garages, we weren't. You know, they came, they got in their cars. They weren't at each other's throats across the garage, you know. But it was there. And, of course, culminating in Japan, when they had each other off, that was bad for us mechanics, you know. We could see it.
Last thing you wanted to see.
Yeah, that was not like the Senna, like the Lewis Championship this year. It wasn't the right way to finish the championship.
No.
That's not what you want. And we could see it building up to it on the big screen. We said this is going to end in
But it was like last year, you could almost feel something was going to happen.
Yeah, whoever writes those scripts,
yeah, got it right.
Got imagination.
Absolutely. So we'll probably talk more about the Senna era when we get some questions later, but following the 89 series, you hang up your tool bag and leave the travelling circus behind?
Well, yeah, I travelled for quite a few years, and, you know, the family were growing, and I thought if I don't find myself a slot back at the factory, you know, if I leave it much longer, there won't be any jobs, permanent jobs, you know, factory-based jobs. So I said, I think I'd like to finish, and Ron said, well, maybe stay on, but a job became available running the gearbox shop.
Yeah.
And I had 16 years of challenging times with my dear colleague Dave North, who's here tonight.
Yeah.
Genius of gearbox design. Such a nice guy. I don't think we ever had a bad word between us. So I did 16 years in the gearbox shop.
It's a long time, isn't it?
Yep, and we did some all-nighters.
But probably when you arrived, a gearbox looked nothing like the ones you would see today.
Well, when I first took over, we more or less had Hewland derivative gearboxes for quite a few years. In fact, you know, race cars still have dog boxes. They're seamless shift and computer control.
But there's still the cogs in the back.
They're not CVT, that never came about. So they're still dogs and cogs. But certainly we had magnesium casings, then we had aluminium casings, then we had fabricated titanium casings, and then carbon casings. And
progress was stunning.
Yes, yeah.
So finally you find your way into the Heritage Centre
to
look after the fleet, or growing fleet of vehicles.
Yeah, so my staff was getting bigger and bigger as the technology moved on the gearbox side, and in the end I think I had about 9 or 10 people. And the paperwork and the lifing systems were getting a bit too much for me. That's not my scene.
No.
And I still love the heritage cars, so the opportunity came up to take over Heritage, which had existed from when Ron first took over, and then he'd folded it, and then it revived, and this was another revival of Heritage. They realised these precious cars were becoming dead, and they needed livening up. And I just enjoyed that so much.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
The bit of footage with you at Goodwood was fairly typical, I guess. You told me a story just now about someone sitting in one of the cars when they started it up.
We had, I was a guest at Monaco to entertain some of the customers of our road car. And there were a couple there, a very pretty lady and her husband, and they'd bought 2 McLaren road cars, and they turned up at Goodwood. So I thought it would be good PR to sit her in that M23, which was actually Emerson's championship car. So I sat her in, and she was over the moon. And she was playing around with, there's the gear lever, and I was doing all that. And then I thought, well, it needs warming up. So I thought, well, this will be a bit of a thrill for her. So I said, don't touch anything.
Famous last word.
So I flicked the ignition switch on, pressed the starter, but I didn't realise she had her foot flat on the accelerator. And I was, and I just about grabbed the steering wheel switch, and that thrilled her.
I bet it did. Probably not in your case, though. Which brings me on, we'll come back to... some of you will have attended the Sterling Moss event here back in the summer, and Neil was here and was helping
Rick Hall
to start the Maserati 250F, which was about to become the star of the show. But the bugger wouldn't start, would it?
It wouldn't start. So he dragged it out of the workshop, and it hadn't been run for 6 months. And Rick, I know very well from historic racing. It was a lovely 250F Maserati. And Pam and I were there dressed up, and it was a lovely day.
But you couldn't help yourself, could you?
And I said, "What's up, Rick? It won't start. I can't understand it. I flooded it." So we took all the plugs out and cleaned them, and it's 2 plugs per cylinder.
Yeah.
And anyway, we cleaned all the plugs and put it back in. And he said, "It doesn't seem to have any fuel, I don't think." Well, he'd forgotten to turn the fuel tap on. So my trick to start these cars, we used to use petrol squirters, but now we use brake clean can. So I got to the front of the inlet for the carbs.
Given the inlet is the whole length of the bonnet.
And we couldn't take that off over the carbs, only for the plugs. So I sprayed it up the inlet. Righto, Rick.
And did he?
And it fired up.
Yeah.
And cut again. So I give it another go. And my hair, I had my hair cut this morning. My hair was down to here but it was long then. So I sprayed again.
You wouldn't stop spraying though, would you?
And I just stood back. It was very hot, and I sprayed again, and away she went, and it primed the fuel pump.
I've never seen anyone move so quick.
No. And I had no eyebrows, and my moustache was ginger, burnt, and I had no hair there. I said, "That's the last time I ever help you again, Rick."
Yeah. But at least the car ran, and it was the star of the show. So
yeah, it was.
Thanks to you. Just going back to the Heritage Collection, do you have a favourite in there?
Well, the 4.4, of course, the Turbo 4.4, and MP41.
Right.
Chassis number 1, the very first carbon chassis. Yeah, I mean, it still looks nice, and the chassis still sound. Years ago they said, "How long's this composite resin chassis going to survive? Are they going to start to fall apart in 10 years?" But we tap them and they're solid, and we don't twist them and check them for stiffness, but looks as good as when we put it together.
Yeah.
Bit of fading in the sunlight in a few places,
Yeah.
but amazing material.
But do you have problems maintaining their ability to run? Is that becoming a problem?
Well, the old DFE cars, MP41, that's easy. But when we come to the TAG turbo engine ones, which had the Motronic control system, electronic control, computer control, then you've got problems. They do die. And in fact, the later cars, 10 years' time, I don't know if they're going to be able to.
Run.
And TAG Electronics, which was founded with Ron Dennis, TAG Electronics, and Dr. Udo Zucker from Bosch. So when the turbo Porsche engine finished, Ron took Udo Zucker from Bosch into McLaren's and formed TAG Electronics.
Oh, really? Right.
And so TAG didn't keep all that software. It's all lost, I mean, there's a guy that's bought up some of the old boxes, and he's starting to refurb them. But in fact, Eberhard Gauber, the Bosch engine electronics man, he started working on his own in retirement, and he made us a new box a couple of years ago, and it was better than the original. Of course. All new systems,
Yeah, more reliable.
It is a problem with all these cars, though.
And it'll only get worse.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There's a very young Lewis Hamilton just flashed up on the screen. Do you remember that? I think you look very young there as well.
You sound and look old now.
What year was that? Roughly.
Oh, well, 2007, yeah, probably. So we knew him from when he was 9 years old, when he first came onto the scene with Ron, and we used to come to our kart races, and we followed his karting and supported him all the way through. And then he came on board, and what a talent. And just for the sake of saying to Ron, I'd like to drive for you in the future.
But Ron was good to his word.
Oh, sure he was, yeah. And he always is, actually. He's a tough cookie, but, he's actually supported a lot of people. And in COVID, he hasn't been recognised for lots of charity work he did in COVID. He set up with Absolute Taste, his catering company. He set up and did thousands of meals for the nurses. Cost him, millions. And
never get recognition.
He wasn't recognised for that, no.
But did he want to be, though?
No, he's strange, I said to him, Ron, we've got to get that knighthood for you soon. He said, I'm not really bothered, but...
I bet he is. It's nearly 2 years ago now that we did a kind of spoof This Is Your Life on Zoom, didn't we? We recorded
for my retirement. It was lovely.
And
thank you.
We managed to get in touch with Ron's secretary, and she said, I don't know whether he'll come online or not. And true to his word, he did, halfway through the session.
He stole the show, though.
It was meant to be your evening.
I know.
He stole the show. Of
course he will.
So, yeah.
That's how he gets money from people.
Yeah. I was going to put a third chair here tonight, just in case.
Oh.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to leave the house lights up so we can see who the guilty party is that wants to ask any questions. Mic doors will be revolving around with the microphone. So, Neil, thank you for the first part of it. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you for being
now
a good interview.
Now we start the interesting.
Neil, you've worked with many good engineers and designers, but who really sort of sticks in your mind as being somebody really special?
There've been a lot. I guess the guy that's stood the test of time is Ayrton Newey. Not easy to work with, very, very fussy and to the nth degree, but look what he's achieved. And, it's interesting now because... Pardon that?
He's having a conversation with himself. So.
Oh, OK. But gearbox design, my friend Dave North, was brilliant. The designers now are generally specialists, It's such a vast field. Formula One cars are so complicated that they all become specialists, Year in, year out, someone might do the hydraulics, someone does the front wing mechanism, because there's so much detail in it. Back in the day, one designer, John Barnard, was brilliant. He could draw the whole car in every detail before anyone made anything. The pedal positions, the steering, the seat, everything. So, obviously, he made his mark. He dropped out of it, you see, because he's arguably yesterday's man. Steve Nichols, very clever man, came in from Monroe Shocks. So suspension was his forte, and then went on to be involved in the design of the overall race car, as with Neil Oatley. These are guys that are here that I work with, and in their day, and Neil is still there now, they understood race cars, but the cars are so complicated now. They're fighter planes on wheels, the computer control, the computer systems. So there have been some good designers. Derek Gardner at Tyrrell, he came up with a six-wheel. He was quite innovative. He lost his way a bit, Derek. He was very funny, very well spoken was Derek. Frightfully, and with such detail. Neil's the same with his printing. You've seen Neil Oatley's printing. I'll tell you something interesting.
He's smiling down the back there, so you're...
Yeah, so a lap chart from Neil Oatley is beautifully done. It's like a work of art. But it's interesting that the designers now, they are struggling with these new cars with ground effect. Now, we had ground effect. But now ground effects come in, they're experiencing porpoising. Now, Adrian Newey will fix it, but it's porpoising. When we first started using ground effect, we experienced it in '79 on the Formula 2 car, and the Formula 1 teams were experiencing it. Porpoising is when you go quicker and quicker and quicker down the straight, and the thing starts to suck down and suck down and suck down until the ground effect plane becomes close to the road, and then suddenly it stalls and you lose that, and it goes up and then it gets sucked down. So in the end, you've got this effect. Well, apparently they're experiencing it now. Well, we fixed it back in the day. I think we made rising rate until it came down just before the point of that stall, and it kind of suspension became solid. And that's why the drivers didn't like it, because the cars were so harsh then. They had no suspension movement.
Before another question, if you were going into it now, I know it's a difficult one, but where do you think you'd be coming into motorsport now? And
I'd probably be sweeping the toilets.
I put you slightly higher than that.
Okay.
Making the tea, yeah, come on, but not. But it must be incredibly difficult to get into.
Well, yes, and as it moved on, I found myself being lost on the life in and computer stuff. So I was going to say that there's Adrian Newey. He doesn't draw in CAD. He draws it all on his drawing board, old style, and he does his sketches and then he gives it to the guys to turn into CAD. And Gordon Murray's the same. But all these designers, they all start when they are thinking up an idea. I've got a folder of Dave North's at home that I salvaged from McLaren's when I left, and I'm giving it back to him. And I open it up.
Of designs.
There's all David's sketches in there, and they always start with a little pencil sketch, and then they start to do it on the CAD. But Adrian still works pencil on paper, so does Gordon. John Sutton, a good gearbox designer, very difficult guy to work with. Dave North's probably going, oh, not that guy. He was difficult to work with, but he could do beautiful sketches, but he never did CAD. Where would I fit in now? I'd like to think I would do graphics or something like that.
I think you'll be good.
All right.
Another question over here.
You talked about your love for cars and engineering and things like that, and interestingly, what you were just saying about what could you be doing now. There was a time when you used to come into work and your moustache would be a little bit singed because you've been practicing certain circus skills. I wonder if you'd like to talk people through that, because maybe not everyone knows about that.
Okay. So I like to do wild things, as my wife will vouch for.
How far are we going with this?
Listen, if this wasn't live stream, we'd have a lot more to talk about.
Cut the feed now.
So I do crazy things. I've done rock climbing. Anything that's wild and interesting. So Hammy at work, this guy at work, he knew I was into that stuff. And he said, I'm going on a fire breathing course down in Brighton. Do you want to come? And I said, yeah, I'm up for it. Well, come the day, and I couldn't make it. So I said, well, you go. When you come back, you show me how it's done. So Hammy went on the fire breathing course. He's a crazy guy. He rides a unicycle, which I'm jealous of. And he came back, and eventually he said, when do you want to do these lessons? And I said, well, any time. So we did it over my allotment. So there we are with paraffin, breathing, flame throwing over the allotment. So I was going to do it as my closing thing tonight.
And you were worried about starting the Maserati 250F. I'm really surprised.
I've had a few close ones.
I think we spoke at one stage and you said, I'm off foraging tomorrow. So clearly you've mastered the art of not eating a bad mushroom then.
Yeah, that was a waste of time. So the family always buy me surprise presents. I don't like to have gifts, to do something. So they sent me on a foraging thing last year, in between the lockdowns. And I thought we were going to be picking mushrooms, and we ended up eating grass all day.
Oh.
And we didn't even find the right grass.
Clearly not. Another question. One over here, Mike. They're always the furthest away. You have to get used.
So the man who's about to take the mic is the ex-McLaren paint shop manager, and his nickname is Teardrop, because he always left a teardrop on the paint. George Langhorne.
Good evening, Neil.
And George's quote is, the paint always passes the line first, the finishing line first.
Please remember that. Neil, I've got a question for you. With all this knowledge and history that you've got, have you ever considered writing a book?
Oh, that's a very serious question, and I've started, but, sit down and dedicate the time to do it. So Joe Ramirez did a lovely book, Memoirs of a Racing Man, and he took 6 months, and he took 6 hours every afternoon doing it. I've started and I'm scribbling notes, and my daughter said, you've got to do it. But actually, last week I did the first. So everyone says, well, don't write it all down. Do recordings first and then come back to it and type it. So I met with Robert Lifford, who was my stats man on my F3 team. He's a real ologist, stats man. And he sat down with me last week for 4 hours and we did the Formula 3 season. I talked about Dick and I've rubbished him a bit in it. But I know.
As you do.
Yep. So I've started, but it's tough, George, you know.
I know someone who might be able to help you out. Richard Williams is pretty good on the old...
Well, I approached him at the break and I said, how much would you charge me for the obituary? And he said, and do you do it, you know, up front beforehand, you know? Yes. And he said, normally when I do that, people live to 100. So
well, there you go.
And I said, have you done your own one yet? And he said, no.
Excellent. We've got off the subject of motor racing quite quickly, but there we go. Gentleman in the front here. Yes, sir.
Hi, Neil. Max here.
Hi, Max.
You've worked with some amazing team principals over the years. Some of the legends, just trying to get in the camera and see Neil. Some of the legends of Formula One. I'm just curious, from your perspective, how do they compare? Ken Tyrrell, RD and Toranak and Brabham, how do they compare in their style?
Well, they're all special people in their own way, as they've proved. Ron is totally OCD. He admits to that, you know, everything. Image is everything, but he says that's what sells things to the sponsors. In 1971, when we ran our Formula 2 team, we were getting ready for Crystal Palace, and we had stripped the cars down, and he insisted we had to repaint them. And why we stripped them down every race, but I went along with it. And so we stripped them down, we put it back together, we worked all night to paint them. You'll see what I'm getting to in a minute. And we turned up at Crystal Palace. They were immaculate, but we hadn't had any sleep. But we had the best image in Formula 2. We worked all day, Graham Hill driving, Tim Schenkin. And there was a burst water main on the circuit at Crystal Palace. And 7 cars went off in the flood. Graham Hill went off and took the back end off the Brabham, bent it, and this was on the Friday. Saturday was the day off, Sunday was the race. But the cars had looked immaculate, right, and that's why we'd worked all night. Ron drove back from the track in his E-Type. He always had the expensive cars. I drove the truck. He never made it back. He ended up in hospital. He'd fallen asleep and hit a lamppost head on in Wandsworth, and that was the end of his mechanicking days, which probably was an advantage to him because he ended up doing the management. And that's because it had to look right. And so that's his image. Ken Tyrrell was very fair, lovely guy. You know, we were a family at Tyrrell. Toranak, he was, you know, he never bore a grudge, Toranak. He'd shout face to face at you 1 minute, and then 2 hours later, he'd be chatting to you. You never approached Toranak until he'd had his morning coffee and cigarette. But yeah, he was. So they're all different in their way.
But he was a workaholic, wasn't he?
Ron was a workaholic. 7 days a week. Ron Toranak, yes. Yeah. He'd go home lunchtime, come back, you know, go home for dinner at night, and fire the microwave up, and then come back. Yeah, he was a workaholic. Yeah, but he was
lovely man.
Yeah, lovely man. Yeah, good guy. He died last year, I think. He lived to 93. I read his at his retirement thing. He did an interview, and he said, "I'm never going to die of an illness." He said, "I think I'll jump off a bridge, so I'm not a trouble to anyone."
Bloody hell.
He was a very practical man.
Well, I knew his daughter, but that's another story.
Way.
It is another story. Another one here at the back, Mike. Yeah.
Is there any truth to a myth that Ayrton Senna sometimes copied the chassis settings from Alain Prost, or more generally, did drivers occasionally or often copy the chassis or engine settings from their teammate?
Right, that's a good question, a simple answer. And I think Steve and Neil will vouch for this. So in '88, they shared their data and helped each other to set the car up. In fact, '88, the cars were fairly straightforward. Out of the box it was quick, but they compared notes, ratios, and Ayrton had the advantage. I'm not sure Steve would agree with this, but Ayrton had the advantage of coming from Honda, and in the first year, certainly for the first part of the season, Alain wasn't using full revs, and I don't think Ayrton told Alain he wasn't using the full benefit of the engine. And
why would he?
Why would he? But they worked very well together in 88. 89, well, I think I wasn't at the debriefs, and these guys were. I think they weren't separate in their debriefs. You know, they shared notes, and yeah, good question though.
Another one at the back. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, it's me over here on the online system. We got Louis Martin on here, says, "Hi Neil, out of all the drivers you had the pleasure of working with, who was your favourite?"
Oh, good question. That's Louis, family friend. Louis is just about to start his apprenticeship at Mercedes Engines. Louis has had leukemia for the last 3 years, and he's recovered.
Brilliant. Have you sip of your wine? Have a sip of that.
So, Louis, favourite drivers? Not one in particular. So, Jack Brabham, certainly. Jack could engineer the car. He could strip a metering unit. He was one of the guys. And that's another thing that's changed in Formula One. Drivers and mechanics, we ate together, we socialised together, we played ping pong, you know, swimming. We'd share the same hotel and swimming pool, and it was a big family. Now I think it's, maybe the press have done that, but it's the drivers and mechanics, not quite the same relationship that we enjoyed. Tom Price was a lovely guy, and I brought him through racing. A great guy. Depaille, I like Depaille. So many drivers. Tim Schenkin drove for us in Formula 2, and Tim was fun, but very quick.
About Rint?
So Rib was very aloof. He was quick. He knew he was quick. Not cocky. I'm not sure if he was shy. But he was, yeah, he was difficult to warm to. Yeah. So Ayrton, of course, you know, he was lovely with us guys. In the beginning of the year, when he first started the season, he'd come round the factory, shake hands with everyone. But he did have his moments. I made a mistake. Well, I had 2 run-ins with Ayrton in our time. First one was when Piquet was starting to ask him, or starting to spread the rumour that Ayrton was gay. And Ayrton said, "I'll see you in court." But one day in the truck, I just kind of brought the subject up. And he shouted at me, he said, "Yes, I am straight and I do girls," he said. So, and he pointed the finger at me, and that was it.
Time to back off.
Yeah. But another time was he lost his temper. I think it was Imola with Mansell, and we brought Ayrton in for a pit stop. But we'd had a problem with the wheel retaining screws, and we took a bit too long on his pit stop. We had to check the inside of the wheel. And after the race, he came up and grabbed me by the collar. "Who did that effing wheel nut?" And I said, "The same guy that won your first race at Lotus for you." I said it was a technical problem. And he wouldn't apologise. And that evening, he finally came up and he said, "I'm sorry," but he had a temper.
What about his religious belief? Did that come into anything in your, you know, when you were working together?
No, we knew he was religious, and he believed, you know, but he didn't influence it at all. He didn't have anything in the car that I knew of that, you know, but he was deeply religious.
Another one, anyone? Tim, we've got another one online, maybe?
What about the worst driver?
The worst driver?
Did everyone hear that? What about
that's a Welshman trying to say worst. This is Hughie Absalom, who he left Brabham's, deserted Brabham's, and went to McLaren with Denny Hulme, unfaithful, and did. Give me some space. Did the M16 IndyCar, very famous man, and still working. In fact, you ran a race car team, Dragon Racing for Mika. Yeah, Vauxhall Opel. So, worst driver.
You've been very political and not answering the question.
I'm trying to, yeah. Jody was Jody was all right. No, worst driver. Alan Berg, my F3 driver. What a piece of work he was. So we...
is he still alive?
Yeah, he is. He's
Alan.
Canadian, and he signed with me. So when I started my F3 team, he signed with me, and his manager was Gaston Perron, who was Villeneuve's manager. So Gaston said, come to Quebec, Montreal, and sign a contract. So I went there, signed a contract, the money was right. His father owned oil wells, and he wasn't as good as he thought he was. And so he tried to blame the team, but he really wasn't. He'd won the Tasman Series, so in a 2-litre car, powerful car, but Formula 3 car was different. And so he left me and went to Eddie Jordan. So I stole Tassan off Argo, and Eddie stole Alan Berg off me. Yeah, a bit like Formula 1.
Yeah.
And his father said, if it takes me 2 oil wells, you will not... I tried to take him to court. He said, you won't win. So he was a nasty... And I even fitted him up with a girlfriend.
Could have been Russian, couldn't he, really?
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Another question. Mike, I've lost Mike. Where are you?
Mike,
Yeah,
Mike with the mic.
Questions? Okay. All right. Well, look, I'm not going to finish it on that note, but
right.
Projections for... Breakfast is served. Projections for this forthcoming F1 season. What do you think is going to happen?
Okay. I'll tell you what I want to mention there is the Honda deal.
Right.
So Honda, when we won the championship with them, with Ayrton and Alain, they were great partners. And their team was so efficient. They could create a new development in a matter of weeks. And we worked. Gotto was the leader, manager, and the team was totally cohesive. And throughout the time, they only changed a few people on that team. It was a training ground for them, but we were as one with them. It was such a team. When they left us the end of '92, they dropped us actually, which they tend to do. So I'm leading up to when they came back to us. So that was a great deal that we did with them, and it was a lot of money, and it was probably, on paper, on merit, you'd have thought they could have done the job straight away, but we struggled with them. It was a whole new team of engineers, totally unfamiliar with what was required of an F1 hybrid engine, and we struggled. Reliability, the hybrid system, the batteries, the motors, the engine itself. I mean, it was just a nightmare. And we went through 2 years of pain, and we blamed the engine, but actually our chassis was also lacking. But so I'm going on to now, the last 2 years. They made that engine sing, and they've got the team together. And it was our loss, but it took that loss of that engine and us going with Renault to find out that our chassis was lacking in performance. We had to do that, and it cost us $100 million a year on the contract. So now here they are, top of the pile with a fantastic engine, the equivalent of Mercedes. But I'll tell you a little story which isn't in the public domain, and it should be. There's a guy named Axel Wendorf. When we went with Honda, again, at the beginning, we stole Axel from Mercedes to help Honda with their development. They wouldn't accept him and they wouldn't work with him. He came in, he was in Japan for months, came back and he said, Neil, how do you work with these guys? They don't want me there, they won't talk to me. They think they know it all. And eventually he came back to McLaren's and he took a job in the factory, not on engines. Right. Ironically, Axel's been with them for the last year and a half, back with them.
Back again.
And look what's happened.
Results.
Yeah. So he's helped them, but they've done it as well. They don't get the credit either. You know, they don't advertise that they've won the championship, but they're good guys. They've done a good job. But Axel is a silent hero in my mind.
So, this year?
Oh, this year? Okay. Well, I don't know, because I think the ground effect, I think Adrian's going to get the hang of that very quickly. He's got an instinctive feel for aero. But we've got a good team. I like to say we, even though
you are still we. You're part of
we.
royalty.
Yeah. So we're good in testing.
Yeah.
And we've got two great drivers.
Yeah.
Lando.
Yeah.
Lando needs a win.